I wasn't looking for evidence of coordinated collapse, but then I found the water systems. Certain municipal engineering diagrams from the 1880s preserved in city planning archives across 3 continents. They showed infrastructure projects of staggering ambition beginning and completing within the same 5-year window. Nothing marked them as connected, but the scale was wrong, the technology too advanced, and the timing too precise to be coincidence. These weren't modest civic improvements. They were complete municipal infrastructure networks, water distribution systems capable of serving populations 10 times larger than the cities possessed. Electrical conduit frameworks installed years before electricity reached most of these locations, underground transit foundations that were never completed but whose supporting infrastructure was already in place. And according to every official timeline, they shouldn't exist in this form. It began with a single set of blueprints, an engineering survey from Denver dated 1887 detailing a pressurized water network with valve systems, junction points, and distribution capacity that exceeded the city's needs for the next 40 years. The measurements used a standardization system I couldn't identify. Not imperial, not metric, not matching any documented engineering standard from the period. I started looking for similar projects. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Between 1885 and 1892, cities scattered across 6 continents installed nearly identical infrastructure using components that appeared to come from the same manufacturing source. Not similar designs. Identical specifications. Valve assemblies with matching thread patterns. Pipe segments with standardized dimensions that allowed components from Melbourne to fit systems in Buenos Aires. Junction boxes engineered to tolerances requiring precision manufacturing that shouldn't exist in frontier industrial facilities. This wasn't gradual urban development spreading organically as cities grew. This was coordinated implementation of identical systems across locations that supposedly operated independently, designed by engineers who supposedly never communicated, built by workers who left no trace in immigration records, using components manufactured in facilities that left no documentation. And then it stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. All at once. Let's examine what we're told about Denver's water system. The city's municipal records indicate a frontier settlement of modest size in 1885, a population hovering around 35,000. Most structures still wood frame, streets unpaved in the residential districts. Within 3 years, Denver had installed a pressurized water network serving 40,000 connections, featuring valve systems engineered for expansion to 10 times that capacity. The pipes were cast iron with standardized threading that matched systems being installed simultaneously in Melbourne, Cape Town, and Buenos Aires. 3 years from basic wells to this. The blueprint I obtained from Denver's planning archive shows technical specifications that professional civil engineers find remarkable. Pressure ratings calculated for distribution networks serving 400,000 people. Junction points positioned using mathematical spacing that optimizes flow dynamics. Valve assemblies designed with tolerances requiring machining precision that municipal records claim didn't exist in Denver's industrial facilities. The measurements throughout use a unit system that converts to neither standard inches nor metric centimeters. Every dimension, every thread pitch, every pressure specification uses this unidentified standard, and cities 8,000 miles apart were using the exact same one. I started checking other continents. Melbourne's engineering department possessed records of an electrical conduit network installed between 1886 and 1889. The city barely had electric streetlights. The conduit system they installed could handle power distribution for a metropolitan area 20 times Melbourne's size. The channel dimensions, the junction box spacing, the access point positioning, all identical to specifications being implemented in North American cities during the same narrow window. Cape Town's municipal archive contained documentation of a sewer system completed in 1890. The valve designs matched Denver's water network. The ceramic pipe compounds matched materials being installed in South American cities. The engineering calculations for flow capacity exceeded Cape Town's needs until the 1950s. Buenos Aires presents the most peculiar case. Construction records from 1885 to 1888 document underground transit foundations, support columns, ventilation shafts, electrical conduit runs. The transit system itself was never built. The trains never ran, but the infrastructure to support them was installed completely, using the same standardized components appearing in water systems, electrical networks, and sewer projects across every other continent, as if someone was preparing for urban infrastructure that Buenos Aires wouldn't actually implement for another 60 years. The pattern didn't weaken, it intensified. San Francisco's post-earthquake reconstruction revealed pre-existing underground networks that shouldn't be there according to the city's documented timeline. Irkutsk in Siberia installed a water distribution system in 1887 using German engineering standards. Except the German cities adopting those standards didn't do so until 1891. Montevideo completed a pressurized water network in 14 months, using valve assemblies that required foundry capabilities Uruguay's industrial base supposedly didn't possess. Every project follows the same chronology. Construction begins between 1885 and 1887. Completion occurs between 1889 and 1892. The infrastructure installed exceeds immediate municipal needs by factors of 5 to 20. The components demonstrate manufacturing standardization requiring industrial coordination that left no documentation. The engineering specifications use measurement systems that don't appear in any national or international standards from the period. We're told these cities were experiencing rapid growth, that forward-thinking municipal planners simply built infrastructure with future expansion in mind. But forward-thinking doesn't explain identical thread pitches on pipe fittings manufactured on different continents. It doesn't explain synchronized construction timelines in cities lacking telegraph communication with each other. It certainly doesn't explain how frontier settlements acquired expertise in engineering standards that supposedly didn't exist yet. The question becomes unavoidable. Where did the components come from? Not the raw materials, though, shipping thousands of tons of standardized cast iron, ceramic compounds, and copper conduit to remote locations poses its own logistical mysteries. The engineering standards, the measurement systems, the design specifications that every city somehow followed identically. You don't independently develop the same proprietary threading system in 6 separate locations. You inherit it. Or you're working from templates provided by a source that coordinated the entire operation. Some engineering surveys from this period show site preparation details that suggest the workers weren't starting from nothing. Foundation excavations in Denver encountered older pipe networks that were removed before the 1887 system was installed. Melbourne's conduit installation required demolition of previous underground channels that aren't mentioned in the city's official construction history. Cape Town's sewer project documentation includes notes about clearing existing infrastructure without specifying what that infrastructure was or when it was built. This presents a coordination problem that the official narrative can't resolve. We're expected to believe that municipal engineers in South America, Australia, Siberia, and North America independently arrived at identical solutions to urban infrastructure challenges, that they developed the same measurement standards without communication, that they achieved the same manufacturing tolerances without shared industrial knowledge, that they synchronized construction phases across oceans without the communication infrastructure to coordinate such timing. The evidence points to something far more systematic, projects separated by 12,000 miles, beginning within months of each other, using components that could be interchanged between cities, as if someone was upgrading a single integrated system, not building independent municipal infrastructure. Where did the components come from? The documentation is sparse. Employment records from this period rarely survived. The few that did show unusual patterns, sudden influxes of European engineering crews appearing for specific projects, then vanishing from the historical record. No immigration documents before their arrival. No subsequent employment after project completion. No family lineages traced forward. They appeared, they installed systems they already understood. They disappeared. I obtained building permits and workforce manifests from several cities. When these documents exist, and often they don't, they reveal timelines that border on impossible. Denver's water system, foundation to completion in 14 months. The project required excavating 240 miles of pipe trenches, installing 40,000 connection points, pressure testing a network designed for expansion to 10 times its initial capacity. The engineering calculations alone should require that long. With hand tools and horse-drawn equipment, the timeline becomes absurd. But this is the peculiar part. The workers described in contemporary municipal reports weren't learning on site. They were, quote, one according to a Denver city planning document from 1887, experienced with systems that supposedly didn't exist yet. One report from Melbourne's infrastructure department notes that installation crews underscore, quote underscore two, underscore underscore. Familiarity suggests prior exposure to components being manufactured for the first time. Not the materials, not the logistics, but the knowledge. That's what doesn't fit. The expertise required to install pressure-regulated water networks, operating at tolerances requiring precision valve timing. The understanding of load-bearing calculations for underground transit foundations that wouldn't support actual trains for decades. The specialized skills for installing electrical conduit in cities that didn't have electricity to distribute. This knowledge doesn't emerge spontaneously in frontier conditions. You inherit it from training, from apprenticeship, from institutional frameworks that preserve and transmit technical expertise across generations. The workforce records show no such frameworks, no engineering schools in these cities during the relevant period, no documented apprenticeship programs for the specialized trades these projects required. The workers appear in employment ledgers for 12 to 18 months, complete infrastructure projects that modern contractors struggle to match in efficiency, then vanish entirely from the historical record. Cape Town's municipal archive contains a letter from the city engineer to the mayor, dated 1889, expressing confusion about the installation crews. Quote 3, the letter states, quote 4, the letter requests investigation into the workforce origins. No response appears in the archive. No investigation records exist. Similar documentation gaps appear in every city, employment ledgers with pages removed. Immigration manifests missing entries for the exact periods when these specialized crews should appear. Payroll records destroyed in fires that somehow left surrounding documents intact. The absence of documentation is itself documentation. It reveals systematic removal of evidence that would answer the most basic questions about who built this infrastructure and where they acquired their expertise. The manufacturing mystery deepens the problem. These standardized components, valve assemblies, junction boxes, pressure regulators, they show identical casting marks across continents. Not roughly similar, identical. The same mold imperfections appear on components installed in Denver and Melbourne. The same metallurgical composition in pipe fittings from Buenos Aires and Cape Town. This suggests centralized manufacturing, production facilities operating at industrial scale, quality control systems maintaining consistency across thousands of components. No such facilities appear in any industrial records from the period. No foundries producing these specific designs, no patents filed for the standardized threading systems, no factory employment records showing the workforce required to manufacture infrastructure components for dozens of cities simultaneously. The industrial infrastructure necessary to produce these elements at this scale should leave extensive traces, factory records, shipping manifests, metallurgical specifications, worker employment documents, patent applications for the specialized manufacturing techniques involved. These records don't exist. Instead, we find silence. Gaps in the archival record precisely where documentation should be most robust. Municipal procurement files with missing invoices. Port Authority shipping logs with entries removed. Patent office records that were lost to water damage at remarkably convenient moments, destroying documentation for this specific type of infrastructure component while leaving adjacent records intact. But the components themselves survived. Valve assemblies still functional after 140 years. Junction boxes maintaining their precision tolerances. Pipe threading that modern metallurgists find remarkable for its consistency. Professional engineers examining these components in preservation studies note manufacturing quality that exceeds period capabilities. Thread pitches machined to 0.01 millimeter tolerances. Pressure ratings that require metallurgical testing equipment not invented until decades after installation. Casting techniques that leave no tool marks, suggesting production methods that don't match any documented industrial process from the 1880s. Where were these components manufactured? The industrial capacity required to produce standardized infrastructure elements for cities across 6 continents the foundries, the machine shops, the quality control laboratories. This represents an industrial operation of staggering scale. Such operations don't vanish without trace. They employ thousands of workers. They consume massive quantities of raw materials. They require shipping networks, fuel supplies, waste disposal systems. Every aspect should leave documentary evidence. The evidence doesn't exist, or more precisely, it was removed. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental loss. Files missing specific pages, ledgers with entries carefully excised, shipping manifests destroyed while surrounding documents survived. Someone made very sure we wouldn't find the source, but the components themselves survived, and they reveal something the scrubbed records tried to hide. The standardization itself presents problems that conventional explanations can't resolve. I sent photographs of pipe threading from Denver's 1887 water system to a metallurgical laboratory that specializes in historical infrastructure analysis. The thread pitch measures 2.847 millimeters, not close to any imperial measurement, not a standard metric dimension. The laboratory checked against every documented threading standard from the 19th century, American, British, German, French, Russian. No matches. Then I sent images of valve assemblies from Melbourne's system, installed in 1889, same thread pitch. 2.847 millimeters, identical to tolerances that require precision measurement tools. The laboratory's report noted that achieving this consistency across components manufactured on different continents would require either centralized production or distribution of extremely precise master gauges to multiple manufacturing facilities. Neither scenario appears in any industrial documentation from the period. Pipe threading is one element. The measurement system extends to every dimension. Junction box depths in Cape Town match specifications in Buenos Aires to the centimeter, but the measurement doesn't convert cleanly to any documented standard. Valve pressure ratings use consistent units not found in any national engineering code. Electrical conduit in cities that didn't have electricity yet, installed with channel dimensions that follow mathematical ratios rather than practical considerations. Professional acousticians examining these conduit systems find something remarkable. The spacing between junction points follows a pattern. In Denver, junction boxes appear every 47.3 meters. In Melbourne, every 47.3 meters. In Cape Town, Irkutsk, Buenos Aires, every 47.3 meters. This isn't approximate. Modern surveying equipment measuring the actual installations confirms the spacing to within centimeters across thousands of miles. Why 47.3 meters? The number doesn't correspond to any standard engineering practice. It's not optimized for the materials being used. It's not based on terrain considerations that would vary by location. It's not derived from any documented load-bearing calculation or maintenance access formula. The spacing simply is, repeated with mathematical precision in every city, suggesting implementation of a standard that existed before these projects began. We're told that international engineering standards emerged in the early 20th century, that coordination bodies like the International Electrotechnical Commission formalized measurements and specifications decades after these infrastructure projects. Yet components from the 1880s demonstrate standardization that predates official development by 30 years. Thread pitches matching to hundredths of millimeters. Pressure ratings using consistent units, dimensional spacing following identical mathematical ratios. This level of coordination requires either impossible communication speed or pre-existing shared standards. The communication problem is straightforward. Telegraph networks existed in the 1880s, but technical specifications can't be transmitted effectively via telegraph. You can't send thread pitch measurements, metallurgical compositions, or pressure valve schematics through Morse code. Blueprint sharing required physical document transport. Shipping times between continents ranged from 6 to 8 weeks, yet construction phases in these cities synchronized within days. Denver's water system began foundation excavation in March 1887. Melbourne's electrical conduit project started in April 1887. Cape Town's sewer network commenced in May 1887. 3 projects on 3 continents, beginning within weeks of each other, all using the same measurement standards, all following the same construction sequence. Foundation work, then trunk line installation, then junction point placement, then connection infrastructure. The phases align across cities as if coordinated by project managers with real-time communication capabilities that didn't exist. How did engineers in Denver know to match thread specifications being installed in Cape Town? How did they coordinate construction phases without the communication infrastructure to synchronize timing? How did they maintain tolerances requiring precision measurement tools not invented until decades later? The conventional answer is that they didn't, that the similarities are coincidental, that independent development produced convergent results. But convergent evolution doesn't explain identical thread pitches. It doesn't explain synchronized construction phases. It certainly doesn't explain mathematical spacing ratios repeated to centimeter precision across continents. The evidence points to implementation of pre-existing standards. These cities weren't developing infrastructure specifications. They were following templates, installing components manufactured to dimensions that already existed as formalized standards, coordinating construction according to schedules that had already been established. The infrastructure surge of 1885 to 1892 wasn't innovation. It was execution of a plan that preceded the documented timeline, using expertise and manufacturing capabilities that official records claim didn't exist yet. And then, around 1892, it ended. Infrastructure projects after 1895 lack the characteristics of their predecessors. The standardization disappears. Cities begin using different measurement systems again, imperial in North America, metric in Europe, local variants elsewhere. The synchronized timing vanishes. Construction projects stretch across reasonable timelines, 5 years, 10 years, progressing at speeds that match available workforce and technology. The components become traceable. Manufacturers appear in procurement records. Foundries document their production. Workers have verifiable employment histories before and after projects. The ornamentation simplifies. Earlier systems featured junction boxes with decorative elements, valve housings with refined casting details, access covers marked with symbols that appeared across continents. Post-1895 infrastructure becomes purely functional. The aesthetic consistency that marked the 1880s surge disappears entirely, replaced by utilitarian designs that vary by city, by contractor, by available materials. Cities attempting similar projects fail to match what was accomplished a decade earlier. Denver's water system expansion in 1903 took 7 years to add capacity that the 1887 installation would have handled immediately if the city had simply activated the over-engineered connections already in place. Melbourne's efforts to extend its electrical conduit network in 1898 encountered problems interfacing with the 1889 system. The thread pitches didn't match standard manufacturing. The junction box dimensions required custom fabrication. Modern contractors couldn't replicate the interfaces, not gradual evolution, a rupture. The official narrative offers economic changes, shifting priorities, the development of new construction techniques. But those explanations don't account for the loss of capability. The 1880s projects demonstrated expertise that subsequent generations couldn't match. Thread precision that required decades to achieve again. Construction timelines that modern project managers consider impossible, even with mechanized equipment. Coordination across continents without the communication infrastructure that would later make such synchronization routine. Societies advance. They build on previous knowledge. They refine techniques, improve efficiency, expand capability. They don't suddenly forget how to achieve what they'd mastered years before, unless the knowledge was never theirs to begin with, unless these cities were completing the final phase of maintenance on infrastructure they'd inherited, using expertise that would soon be cut off entirely. I reached out to municipal engineers, infrastructure historians, archival specialists. I asked simple questions. Where did the standardization come from? How were the timelines achieved? Why did the capability vanish after 1892? Who manufactured the components that appear identical across continents? The silence was overwhelming. Not hostility, not defensiveness, just disinterest, as if the questions themselves were irrelevant. One civil engineer specializing in historical water systems acknowledged the thread pitch anomaly, confirmed that the measurements don't match any documented standard, then suggested it _5_. When I asked how coincidence explains precision to hundredths of millimeters, he stopped responding to emails. An archivist at a municipal planning department admitted The 1880s construction timelines seem underscore quote underscore 6 underscore, but attributed this to underscore quote underscore 7 underscore. The infrastructure exists. Therefore, it was built. The timeline is documented, therefore it's accurate. The official record is complete, therefore no investigation is needed. Circular reasoning that forecloses examination before it begins. I contacted preservation societies that maintain the physical components. They possess the valve assemblies, the junction boxes, the pipe segments, with their inexplicable threading. I requested permission for metallurgical analysis, offered to fund the testing myself. The requests were declined. These components are cataloged artifacts, one preservation director explained. Analysis would require destructive sampling. Non-destructive testing exists. The refusal wasn't about preserving the artifacts. It was about preventing examination of what they might reveal. Academic infrastructure histories skip the 1885 to 1892 period entirely, or treat it as unremarkable urban development. Standard textbooks on civil engineering history mention Denver's water system in a single sentence. Note Melbourne's electrical conduit as an example of quote 10, dismiss the synchronized timing as coincidental. The impossible aspects aren't addressed because acknowledging them would require explanations that the official narrative can't provide. The components themselves are evidence. The synchronized timelines are evidence. The impossible standardization, the vanished workforce, the scrubbed manufacturing records, all evidence. The question isn't whether evidence exists. It's whether we're permitted to examine it honestly, and the institutional response suggests we're not. But physical evidence doesn't retreat. During renovation work in the 1960s and 1970s, workers digging beneath established infrastructure found something that changed their plans. A 1968 work report from Denver's water department documents a routine main replacement project. Excavation reached 8 feet below the 1887 installation. Workers encountered an older pipe network, not primitive earlier attempts, not wooden water mains or crude clay conduits. Pipes manufactured from a material the work crew couldn't identify, not cast iron, not clay ceramic, not any compound the municipal engineers recognized. The pipes were still functional, still maintaining pressure, still distributing water through a system that supposedly didn't exist. The work report notes that the crew foreman halted excavation and contacted the engineering department. The response, documented in the same file, instructed them to, quote, 11. The older pipes were extracted, transported to municipal storage. No metallurgical analysis appears in any subsequent record. No investigation into their origin, their age, or their manufacturing method. Melbourne's electrical grid expansion in 1974 encountered similar discoveries. Workers installing new conduit 8 feet below the 1889 system found pre-existing channels. The walls were vitrified, fused into a glass-like surface using a process that requires temperatures exceeding anything available with 19th century technology. The channels followed the same mathematical spacing ratios as the 1889 installation above them. Junction points aligned vertically between the two systems, as if the later construction had been positioned deliberately to match infrastructure that was already there. Cape Town's sewer renovation in 1979 revealed an earlier network beneath the 1889 brick system. The pipes used a ceramic compound that materials engineers couldn't replicate. Contemporary analysis described it as similar to modern polymer ceramic composites, but manufacturing date inconsistent with material science timeline. The older system showed no deterioration. After 90 years underground, the material remained structurally sound, chemically stable, resistant to the corrosion that had damaged the brick network installed above it. The pattern appears in every city where deep renovations occurred. Beneath the 1880s infrastructure lay older construction using different materials, different techniques, superior engineering. The findings are documented in work reports, then sealed. Workers receive instructions not to discuss the discoveries. Components are removed to municipal storage facilities where they remain uncatalogued, unexamined, inaccessible to researchers who might ask uncomfortable questions about what they represent. The 1880s projects weren't creating infrastructure, they were replacing it. Upgrading systems that had existed before, converting them to materials and standards that could still be manufactured after the source of the original technology disappeared. Let me be precise about what we're examining here. Between 1885 and 1892, cities across 6 continents installed nearly identical infrastructure using components manufactured to specifications that don't match any documented engineering standard. The projects began within months of each other despite communication limitations that should prevent such coordination. Construction timelines defied reasonable expectations. 14 months for water networks that modern contractors consider impossible to complete in less than 5 years. The workforce possessed expertise with systems they supposedly encountered for the first time, demonstrated familiarity with standardized components that were allegedly being manufactured simultaneously for initial deployment, then vanished entirely from employment and immigration records. The components themselves demonstrate precision requiring manufacturing capabilities beyond documented period technology. Thread pitches machined to tolerances of hundredths of millimeters. Pressure ratings calculated using measurement systems that appear in no engineering literature. Junction box spacing following mathematical ratios repeated across continents with centimeter-level accuracy. Metallurgical compositions that modern laboratories struggle to explain, casting techniques that leave no tool marks, quality control suggesting industrial coordination at unprecedented scale. This coordination occurred without the communication infrastructure to support it. Telegraph networks couldn't transmit technical specifications. Physical document shipping required 6 to 8 weeks between continents, yet construction phases synchronized within days. Foundation work, trunk line installation, junction placement, connection infrastructure, all following identical sequences in cities supposedly operating independently. The capability vanished after 1892. Later projects lack the standardization, the precision, the construction efficiency. Cities attempting to expand the 1880s infrastructure can't manufacture compatible components. The thread pitches don't match modern standards. The measurement systems can't be replicated. The expertise that completed these projects in impossibly short time frames disappeared as if cut off at the source. Physical evidence reveals older infrastructure beneath the 1880s installations. Not primitive earlier attempts, but more sophisticated systems, using materials that shouldn't exist in that timeline. Pipes manufactured from unknown compounds. Conduit channels with vitrified surfaces requiring temperatures beyond period capability. Ceramic composites that modern engineers can't replicate. These discoveries are documented, then sealed. Components removed to storage facilities where they remain unexamined. Workers instructed not to discuss what they found. The documentation that should explain these mysteries doesn't exist. Manufacturing records absent. Patent applications missing. Employment ledgers with pages removed. Immigration documents lost to convenient fires. Shipping manifests with entries excised. Municipal procurement files destroyed while surrounding records survived. The gaps appear precisely where evidence should be most robust, suggesting systematic removal rather than accidental loss. Institutional authorities dismiss the questions. The infrastructure exists, therefore it could be built. The timeline is documented, therefore it's accurate. The anomalies are coincidental, the result of exceptional efficiency, forward-thinking planning. Motivated workforce. Requests for component analysis are denied. Archival investigations are discouraged. Academic histories skip the period entirely or treat it as unremarkable. The conventional explanation requires us to believe that dozens of cities independently decided to prioritize infrastructure. Using proprietary measurement systems, they developed identically without communication. That they achieved manufacturing precision decades ahead of documented capability. That they coordinated construction without the technology to synchronize timing. That they employed workers with expertise in systems not yet built. That they completed projects in timeframes that violate physical constraints. That this capability then vanished completely, leaving later generations unable to replicate or even interface with what their predecessors accomplished. That evidence of older, more advanced infrastructure beneath these installations is irrelevant. That the systematic absence of documentation is unremarkable. And that questioning any of this represents conspiracy thinking rather than legitimate historical inquiry. How many coincidences before we're obligated to consider alternative explanations? A photograph preserved in Denver's municipal archives dated 1891 shows something the caption doesn't mention. The image captures a completion ceremony for the city's water system. Officials stand beside a newly installed valve assembly, workers arranged behind them, the infrastructure gleaming in afternoon light. Everything appears as the historical record describes. A frontier city celebrating modern municipal achievement. But look closer. The valve assembly isn't new. The metal shows patina, oxidation patterns suggesting decades of exposure. The junction box visible in the background has repair welds, different metallurgy from the primary casting, techniques that don't match 1890 standards. The pipe sections extending from the valve display were consistent with 40 years of service, not fresh installation. The infrastructure wasn't new, it was refurbished. This detail appears in photographs from other cities. Melbourne's 1889 electrical conduit opening shows components with surface weathering that contradicts their supposed manufacture date. Cape Town's sewer system dedication in 1890 features junction covers with corrosion patterns requiring extended environmental exposure. Buenos Aires Transit Foundation completion ceremony in 1888 displays structural elements bearing marks of prior use, repair, and restoration. The ceremonies weren't celebrating new construction. They were marking the completion of emergency restoration, the final coordinated upgrade of infrastructure. That had existed long before the official founding dates of these cities. The 1880s surge was maintenance, not innovation. A last desperate effort to standardize failing systems, using materials and techniques that could still be manufactured, to convert sophisticated networks into forms that would remain functional after the expertise to maintain the originals disappeared. After 1892, that expertise was gone. The ability to service what they'd inherited vanished with everything else. We've been living on borrowed systems ever since, slowly watching them decay, unable to replicate what our predecessors maintained as routine. I didn't start this investigation believing in lost civilizations or hidden history. I found coordinated infrastructure projects that didn't align with accepted explanations and followed the inconsistencies wherever they led. They led here to a pattern of synchronized restoration across continents, completed in the years immediately before the knowledge, the manufacturing capability, and the institutional expertise required to maintain such systems vanished from the historical record. This wasn't new construction. It was the final maintenance cycle of infrastructure we inherited without understanding its origin. The photograph captures that moment, the last time anyone knew how to service what they'd been given. After 1892, we've been caretakers of systems whose design principles we don't comprehend, whose manufacturing we can't replicate, whose standardization we can't explain. The water still flows through pipes installed in 1888. The electrical conduits still guide power through channels laid in 1889. We use them daily, never asking who designed the measurement standards, who manufactured the components, or why the capability to do so again disappeared entirely. The infrastructure remains. Functional, indispensable, and utterly unexplained. The buildings stood as monuments to theaters we never built. These systems stand as monuments to knowledge we never possessed. What else are we using daily without knowing where it came from? And what happens when these systems, installed in that final surge of coordinated maintenance, finally fail beyond our ability to repair them? I wasn't looking for proof of Tartaria's final infrastructure upgrade. I was looking for an explanation that fits the synchronized timing, the impossible standardization, the vanished expertise, the evidence sealed in municipal storage facilities across continents. And the further I dug, the clearer it became. Whatever maintained these systems across continents for generations, it completed one last coordinated upgrade in the 1880s, then disappeared so completely, we've convinced ourselves it never existed. The infrastructure stands as monument to that erasure. Every morning, water flows through networks installed in 14 months using manufacturing techniques we can't replicate. Electrical systems guide power through conduits positioned with mathematical precision we don't understand. Sewer networks function using engineering principles that weren't formally discovered until decades after their installation. We inherited functional systems and mistook inheritance for achievement. The photographs remain. Municipal archives still hold completion ceremony images showing components with wear patterns that contradict their documented age. Work reports from 1960s and 1970s renovations still document discoveries of older infrastructure beneath the systems we claim as original construction. The valve assemblies, the junction boxes, the pipe segments with their inexplicable threading, they persist in storage facilities where preservation societies prevent their examination. The evidence survives despite generations of institutional neglect. But the answers, those are sealed behind archival doors we're told don't need opening. Hidden in municipal storage, we're assured, contains nothing of significance. Buried beneath explanations that collapse under scrutiny but remain unchallenged because questioning them requires acknowledging a civilization whose existence we've written out of accepted history. The conventional timeline can't accommodate infrastructure this sophisticated appearing this suddenly, maintain this efficiently, then ceasing this completely. So the timeline dismisses the evidence rather than adjusting to accommodate it. What knowledge did this infrastructure represent? Who possessed the expertise to design systems using measurement standards that predate their supposed invention? What came before the official founding dates of these cities? And what was already there when settlers arrived to claim virgin territory that somehow possessed underground networks requiring only restoration to function? What happened between 1892 and 1895 to sever the connection to that expertise so completely that later generations couldn't interface with what their immediate predecessors had installed? The infrastructure wasn't ours. We were given caretaker responsibilities for systems we didn't build, using knowledge we didn't develop, maintaining standards we didn't establish. For a brief window between 1885 and 1892, that knowledge was accessible. Specialized crews appeared, performed the final upgrade, standardized the systems to specifications that could still be manufactured after the source disappeared. Then the window closed. The workers vanished. The manufacturing stopped. The documentation was systematically removed. And we were left with functional infrastructure whose origins were forbidden to investigate honestly. What else did we inherit without knowing its source? The theaters that appeared fully formed in frontier settlements. The architectural knowledge that produced acoustic perfection decades before the science was formalized. The manufacturing capabilities that vanished after completing their final projects. The pattern extends beyond infrastructure into every domain where impossible. Sophistication appeared briefly, functioned perfectly, then disappeared, leaving later generations unable to replicate what came before. We live in the ruins of something larger, not collapsed ruins, functional ones. Infrastructure still operating, buildings still standing, systems still serving their purpose. But ruins nonetheless, because we've lost the knowledge to maintain them properly, to expand them correctly, to understand the principles that made them possible. We inherited a world and convinced ourselves we built it. The 1880s infrastructure surge was the last moment of contact with whatever provided that knowledge. The final coordinated effort to preserve essential systems in forms that would remain functional after the expertise vanished. After 1892, we've been alone operating inherited technology, slowly forgetting it wasn't ours to begin with. And what happens when these systems, installed in that final coordinated upgrade, finally fail beyond our ability to repair them?